In Bullet Heaven number 86, we took a look at Deathsmiles for the Xbox 360. We also covered the Steam release in Bullet Heaven EX23. In both cases, we really enjoyed Cave's take on the side-scrolling jetpack hero-style gameplay pioneered by Capcom in the 80s, and it served as a great starting point for players looking to get into Danmaku shooting games. Though Deathsmiles saw a very wide release and was generally well received, its sequel was much more obscure.
Deathsmiles II-X Makai no Merry Christmas is a horizontal shooting game developed and published by Cave for the Xbox 360. Based on the original arcade version, which saw release in May 2009, the Xbox 360 version was released to retail in May 2010. It would also later see release to Xbox Games on Demand in North America in May 2011. Deathsmiles II-X has a very different flavor than its predecessor, and is generally disliked quite a bit by Cave fans for it. But is it really that bad? Let's take a look.
Deathsmiles 2 in general plays a lot like the original Deathsmiles did when we took a look at it before, and it's played in one of three main modes. On the outset of any mode, players have their choice of characters from a roster that varies between these modes. Arcade Deathsmiles 2 has just 4, while X mode and Arrange have a full 6. As players make their way through the stage sets of each mode, they can also choose which stage to take on next in a non-linear fashion, just like the first game.
In general, players move their chosen character around the screen with typical 8-way control. Any character chosen has a solid movement rate which allows players to get around the screen in a pretty efficient manner. Like most Cave games, the movement rate can be reduced by using focused fire. The player will only take damage if they are hit in the small heart-shaped hitbox. Bullets will pass harmlessly by everywhere else.
Like Capcom's Jetpack Hero games, players can fire both left and right by using either the A or B buttons or the L and R triggers on the Xbox 360 pad. These shot directions are independent of player movement, so the player's character does not have to change direction in order to fire. While the triggers are rapid only, the A and B buttons can be held down for focus fire in their assigned direction for more precision.
Each character also has a familiar which not only flies along with them, but also lays down additional fire. Main fire and familiar fire play important roles in arcade, but less so in X mode and Arrange for scoring, which we'll take a look at shortly. Familiars have different movement styles depending on the character as well, which is important to consider as the familiar can also be positioned to block certain shots, especially suicide bullets.
Players also have special attacks at their disposal in the form of magic circles and bomber attacks. The magic circle is enabled with the X button and will lock onto enemies to fire homing beams at them. These homing beams can also take out enemies in the background, which cannot be hit with regular fire. A counter in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen displays the amount of power available for the magic circle, and it will reduce when the circle is used. A visual indicator of this power also exists around the player. Rings dropped by defeated enemies will fill both this power and a secondary bonus count in different ways depending on the mode played.
When the count reaches 1000, it will glow yellow, indicating that the player can boost their firepower to deal huge damage and increase their bonus chance. As this happens, the player's energy will decrease until it reaches 0 and the boost ends. If a player is hit though, the boost will immediately cease and the power and bonus count will drop to 0.
If players need a bit more firepower, or if they find themselves in a bind, they can press the Y button to deploy a screen-clearing bomb. All in all, everything is laid out in a way that players should be able to fairly easily control the game in a pretty natural way.
That covers the main controls, but each mode plays slightly different than the last. Firstly, arcade is the most basic mode of play with only 5 stages and a more restricted 4:3 aspect ratio than the other modes in this release. In general, arcade is also pretty much the hardest mode, as it also does not give the player a choice of difficulty between stages. It is basically set to level 3 all the time. All of the core control mechanics apply here.
Ring drops are a bit more involved here than in other modes. Smaller gold rings with a red glow will fill the main power count when enemies are defeated with normal fire, while silver rings with a blue glow will fill the bonus gauge through familiar fire. Power boost otherwise works the same as mentioned before.
X mode is an arranged version of the game made specifically for the Xbox 360 and the default mode when the game is booted up. In addition to the variable difficulty that can be chosen from stage to stage, a 6th score stage, an optional 7th, and the addition of Follette and Rosa as playable characters, it adds a couple of great twists to arcade that make it much more fun and more flexible for newcomers as well.
Ring pickups will add to the player's power and bonus regardless of their type. This allows players to better fill the gauge for more firepower more often, as well as increased bonus chances, which we'll talk about soon. The power boost is handled a bit differently though. When in a boosted state, special blue bullets will be shot at the player that gradually home in on the player's hitbox. Players should be able to get out of the way very easily, and they will also disappear over time. However, these bullets serve another purpose.
These blue shots can be corralled around the player much like in the Mushihime-sama Futari Arrange mode. When the bullets draw near, a line will appear behind them, better indicating their directionality. If the player activates their magic circle, these shots will be reflected in the opposite direction the blue shots are traveling, which can not only strike enemies but also results in giant bonus chances. Few things are quite as satisfying as blasting 50 blue bullets away, dealing stupid amounts of damage, and filling the screen with just a ridiculous amount of rings.
Finally, Arrange mode changes things up with a tension gauge. This gauge will rise and fall with enemy destruction between heaven and hell, and the game will react dynamically with more or fewer bullets as it happens. The magic circle is mapped to the right bumper in this mode. When activated, the player's familiar will be launched in the direction they happen to be relative to the main character and will lock onto anything they pass. Homing beams will then be launched at anything that's locked on when the familiar returns. Boost mode is also automatic, but all built-up power is forfeit by using the bomb.
Both familiar and player shots can clear away most bullets except purple ones. Unique skulls can also spawn from magic circle impacts to shoot even more destructible bullets. But the mechanics here are a little muddy, and we didn't have as much fun in this mode overall. However, it has the same 7-stage set as X mode, with the ability to play with 2 players, unlike a lot of Cave's other Arrange modes we've taken a look at.
On the whole, we really like Deathsmiles 2 from a gameplay standpoint. It's more streamlined than its predecessor and, as a result, a great game to get new players introduced to bullet hell with its easy level 1 settings. But it still presents a decent challenge on level 3 in arcade. Like the original, the ability to choose which order to take the stages is also a great way to boost replay to figure out the best way to approach the game as a whole. There are also some pretty intensive true last boss conditions for those that want to squeeze as much as possible out of this game.
It also has plenty of replay right off the bat with its 3 modes and extras. With the exception of the slightly wonky control and Arrange, there isn't much to the gameplay that we really don't like, and the scoring makes it all even better.
Each included mode in Deathsmiles II-X has score hooks that can make them feel very different from one another. In general though, the rings dropped from fallen enemies and power boosting are what players will need to focus on when trying to score big. Scoring with rings in all modes is generally the same. Players will receive a bonus score equal to the amount of rings at the time of pickup, with varying maximum point scores. Entering power-up will also cause many more rings to be produced, allowing for a faster maximum score per ring.
In arcade, players will want to use Familiar Fire to boost up the bonus counter under the special energy count. The bonus counter can be built up to a maximum of 10,000. When the player enters a powered-up state, this count will be added to every ring collected as a point bonus until the boost ends. This is the most basic the scoring gets, and extend scores are pretty easy to achieve if properly done.
X mode is where things get really satisfying though. The exact same scoring mechanics apply in X mode as they do in arcade, but the scores are boosted considerably when maximum bonus is achieved. Rings will turn purple and will award an extra 100,000 points to a boosted 5,000 points per ring when collected in boost. But it goes even further. When players reflect the special blue suicide shots that home in on their character's hitbox, a gigantic cascade of rings will also be produced, leading to some disgustingly big bonuses.
Arrange changes things a bit with its score mechanics though. Players will definitely want to focus on getting the tension gauge built up to hell in order to produce an army of bullets to clear away. The more, the better. Familiar bullet clears will produce rings for every bullet eaten, but bombing will also produce rings from every bullet on screen as they are taken out. Given that bombers also occur more frequently in this mode, the strategy can be used more often than players might expect. Otherwise, ring scores behave similarly to arcade and X mode. Getting skulls to appear will also produce more bullets for the player to wipe.
Generally, the player will collect green rings to boost the bonus counter, which only falls during boss fights. However, more rings can often be collected during boss fights than are lost. This factors into a boss kill bonus, in which a base point amount is multiplied by a number indicated with gold numerals in the bonus counter for defeating each boss phase. The final numeral in the bonus counter is white and removed from the counter, which makes up the multiplier. If the player, therefore, has a counter of 65,347, the 7 is dropped, leaving a multiplier of 6,534, which is then applied to the boss kill bonus. If that bonus is 10,000 points, the player would net about 65.3 million points. It feels messy in general. The best, cleanest, most satisfying bonus mechanics are found in X, all told.
All scores are saved to the Xbox 360's hard drive, and online leaderboards allow players to see how they stack up to other players worldwide. Of course, given that Deathsmiles II-X is as similar as it is to the original in terms of its core gameplay, having a satisfying scoring system is definitely a plus. This is especially true in the case of the X mode, with giant golden bonus numerics forming a steady stream that flows straight into the player's totals.
A lot of naysayers with regards to Deathsmiles II-X immediately point to its presentation. In a lot of ways, Deathsmiles II-X is a game that is quite a bit different than any other cave shooting game we've taken a look at so far. But nothing about the aesthetics really affects the gameplay in any sort of way. While the game is presented with 3D polygons in place of 2D sprites and backgrounds, players still have a specific visual hitbox and all bullets are still in 2D.
But the 3D visuals aren't terrible. Sure, they may seem a bit stiff, but generally speaking, they still look fine for what they represent. Some elements, like the backgrounds, are also decently modeled and textured with enough going on to keep them lively without being too busy. The 2D stuff is actually where we found issue. Outside of the great cover illustrations and the decent character design overall, the general art direction is less strong than the originals.
But Deathsmiles II-X features extra pre-rendered scenes for the bosses in the Xbox 360 special modes, which is a nice touch, if a bit superfluous. While everything looks fine in X mode and Arrange, Arcade is quite a bit lower resolution than the other modes and looks a bit washed out as well. Some of the 3D modeling misbehaves, and some masking artifacts are also present across all modes too. But there's another much worse aspect of the visuals in this game. There are way too many images in this game of underage girls with way too little on. Even with hidden bits and obscured views, this is just a bit too uncomfortable for us, and it may be the predominant factor behind Deathsmiles II-X's lack of availability in Europe's Games on Demand store. Seriously, this is too much.
Deathsmiles II-X's sound effects are pretty decent here, but we aren't a huge fan of the VO, especially Satan Claus's dumb voice. He was way more irritating than we'd have liked. The familiars seem a bit too deadpan and stilted, which we guess is probably intentional, but still kinda grating. Oh, and we can't talk about VO without highlighting this little nugget. In the case of Arcade though, there is no VO at all in the story scenes, instead opting for text effects.
The music here is good, but with fewer standouts than the original. We really like the stage theme to In the White Darkness though. A quick Joy to the World flourish plays just before each boss, which, you know, Christmas and all, but the boss theme is little more than a slightly worse remixed version of the original's boss theme. At the very least, the final boss encounter is original, not just Toccata and Fugue in D minor again.
Deathsmiles II-X has a good amount of replay through its story, with varying scenes depending on the character chosen, and dynamic interactions between characters in two-player co-op games. However, the entire story is written and voiced in Japanese. There is even an extra mode for the player to take on in the form of the obstacle course style time attack courses in Tsukaima Race.
The menus are easy enough to navigate without knowing much Japanese. There's an unlockable image gallery in Tsukaima Race and a number of achievements for the players to tackle. Replays round out the presentation, though we ran into issues with the replay functions. This replay, for example, was a 2 billion 1cc run, but the replay killed off the player character in Stage 3. That's iffy. But in the end, how does Deathsmiles 2 stack up? Let's take a look. The controls in Deathsmiles II-X work pretty well on the whole, and it's at least as good as the original in X in Arcade.
The Arrange mode doesn't feel quite as good though.
Generally speaking, Deathsmiles II-X is pretty easy for players to get a quick 1cc on lower levels, particularly in X and Arrange.
Level 3 in X and Arrange as well as Arcade does present much more challenge though, and the true last boss conditions are pretty hard.
There is a good amount of game to play in this release with its 3 main modes and extras.
There's a decent amount of replay to be had with co-op play as well, though the story is entirely in Japanese.
The visuals themselves aren't terrible, and while we would have preferred better 3D or clearer 2D, what's here is still good.
But we really don't like the ending images. They're pretty gross. The art direction in general is also weaker than the first game.
Deathsmiles II-X sounds good on the whole. The BGM mostly works and the sound effects are decent.
The VO isn't especially on point though, and we kind of hate Satan Claus's dumb voice.
Generally speaking, this is basically Deathsmiles with a more streamlined scoring system.
What it does adequately, but there isn't a lot here that could make it better than the original. The replays are busted though.
Deathsmiles II-X isn't as cheap as the original, but it is much less expensive than a lot of other shooters on the Xbox 360. As of this review, it can be had for about $50 or less. Limited editions exist, but cost more.
But it can also be had digitally on the Xbox Marketplace for Xbox 360 in North America for about $30. Keep in mind, it's not backward compatible with Xbox One.
Deathsmiles II-X really just feels like a made-for-TV Christmas special or straight-to-DVD release. Despite its tight gameplay, it is generally not as good as its predecessor thanks to weaker visual and sound design and really questionable ending stills. It's still definitely worth a look for scoring at least, and the core gameplay is still pretty fun, and an easy non-TLB 1cc for newbies to boot. Deathsmiles II-X gets a 3.5 out of 5. You can get a physical retail copy of Deathsmiles II-X at auction for varying amounts or digitally on the Xbox Marketplace for about $30. I've got 2 words for you.
And what would those be?
Heavy machine gun.
I'm sorry, but rocket launcher.